Okay, A Handful of Time, Chapter 12. Please read along with either your eyes or your finger, and make sure you can mute it if you want to mute it, but make sure you get your reading strategies done. Chapter 12. The next morning, Aunt Ginny called Patricia into her bedroom when she was dressed. Your Nan didn't realize what she was saying last night. Lately, she's been rambling more and more, and I worry about her. She sighed. It's hard to keep it when people grow old. It's hard to accept it when people grow old. At breakfast, the other children passed her the cereal before she asked for it and let her have the prize inside. Then Nan took her aside and apologized. I got carried away, darling. Your mother has always had an effect on me, and I wasn't aware Ginny hadn't told the others. Will you forgive your old Nan? I will never forgive you, thought Patricia. She ducked to avoid Nan's kiss, but it caught her in the side of the head. I don't feel like going swimming, Patricia told Aunt Ginny in a tight voice. Is it all right if I stay here? Of course, dear. Aunt Ginny gave her a look of such loving concern that Patricia almost shouted, Leave me alone! A little later, when she was alone, she savored her solitude for a few minutes. She had never been in the cottage by herself, either in the past or in the present. The small house, layered with the accumulations of generations, fitted comfortably into either time. Patricia rocked in the creaking wicker chair, staring at Maggie's coloring book lying on the rug, its pages held open by Ginny's wooden crayon box. It wouldn't have surprised her if both Ruth and Kelly had come into the room together, but she knew she had to wind up the watch to really get back to the past. She shook herself alert and climbed the stairs to the attic. A cloud of stale air engulfed her. Her nose tickled with dust as she picked up the shoebox and took out the watch. With much difficulty she pushed up a stiff window and squatted on the floor beside it, gulping in the fresh breeze. For a few seconds she gazed reverently at the watch. It was miraculous that a portion of the past was contained in a golden disc she could hold in her hand, a handful of time. A time that somehow claimed her more than her own. How lucky she was to have found the watch exactly when she needed it. But how had it become lost? She wished she could have solved this mystery. She twisted the knob, listened to the reassuring metallic tick, then hung the watch around her neck. She turned her head. Now there were 2 unmade beds in the attic. Boys' shirts and socks littered the floor. She wondered how Gordon and Rodney could bear to sleep in such a stuffy room. At first Patricia could remember where the watch had left her last time. Then she recalled sitting on the beach while Ruth read to Ginny. They would still be there, but to return to lunch, footsteps moved around the kitchen below. She crept down the stairs and found Ruth's mother making sandwiches. She was slicing bread efficiently. Patricia watched her with distaste, amazed at her stupidity. She had tried to escape Nan by leaving her in the present, but she had forgotten. How could she? That Nan was also part of the past. Usually she was able to cast off her own time and worries as soon as she wound the watch. Now her much younger grandmother's piercing eyes reminded her painfully of them. But at least, in this time, Nan wasn't aware of Patricia. Here, she couldn't question or embarrass her. She didn't even know her granddaughter existed. Patricia stuck her tongue out at her. Then she went out to the front steps to wait for Ruth. To make sure that she would stay in the past for as long as time as possible, Patricia wound the watch so that it would last for 2 days, and then rewound it as quickly as possible whenever it ran down and looked back and took her back to the attic. She soon became used to these brief flashes to the present, like turning over in her sleep and opening her eyes for an instant. One evening after dinner, she was surprised to hear Rodney mention that the family had been at the lake for only a week. It's great that we still have almost 2 months until school starts, he said to Gordon. They were cleaning the telescope on the veranda. Ruth was bent over her puzzle. Patricia did a rapid calculation and realized he was right. Only a week had passed here since she had first seen them playing badminton and arguing. It had been longer than that in her own time because of all the days during Nana's visit when she'd come. Is everything ready for tonight? Rodney whispered to Gordon. Ruth looked up suspiciously. What's happening? What are you doing tonight? Nothing's happening, infant, said Gordon. Run away and leave us alone. Shouldn't you be helping Ma with the dishes? They're done. I have as much right to be here as you have. Ruth's brothers just grinned, sharing a secret. That night Ruth slept in her clothes. She kept the curtains open and seemed to be listening for something. Patricia yawned. She wished they could go to sleep. In the morning she had swum a lot. She was beginning to relish the biting water that was cooler and cleaner than it was in the present. But Ruth continued to bob restlessly, looking out the window. Then she listened especially hard, pushing the window up high, lowered it on top of the notch on the piece of wood that held it open, and squirmed out. Patricia followed her reluctantly. She was not much of a climber, and it was tricky to copy the way Ruth swung herself into a tree and slithered down. But she didn't want to miss anything, and soon, hurrying to keep up with Ruth's rapid trot, she was wide awake with curiosity. The stars blazed overhead, and Patricia kept her head up in wonder as she ran along the road. They were going in the direction of the Indian Reserve. Soon they heard muffled laughter. Ahead of them was a group of teenagers, Gordon and Rodney, 2 other boys and 2 girls. "I caught you," Ruth called triumphantly. Patricia watched Rodney's startled face with satisfaction. "What are you doing here?" he said angrily. Gordon glowered at his sister. "I could ask you that," said Ruth. She tucked her hands into her pockets and looked up calmly at the 6 figures surrounding her. "You're going to raid the camp, aren't you?" "You get home right now, Ruth," ordered Gordon. "You can't make me." "I want to come too. If you don't let me, I'll tell." "Looks like you don't have a choice, Reed," said one of the boys. His red hair matched the girls'. "He must be their brother." Patricia recognized them from the store. They were the Thorpes, the ones who'd asked Rodney to the marshmallow roast. "Let her come," said the other boy. It was Tom Turner. "She's pretty gutsy, following us." Her brothers refused to speak to her, but the girls were friendly as they continued along the shadowy road. "This is spooky," one of them shivered. "Are you scared, Ruth?" Ruth shook her head. They reached a sign that Patricia had seen before, St. Stephen's Church Retreat, but it was freshly painted, and the long cabins beyond it looked new. "What do we do now?" giggled the girl as they called Barbara. "We'll just give the kids a scare," said Gordon. "You and Winnie and Ruth come with me. Paul and Tom and Rodney can take care of the cabin out on the other side. When I hoot twice like an owl, Paul, that will be the signal. Rodney has everything you need. Then run. We'll meet back at the Owens Pier." "But what if they catch us?" asked Winnie. "They never have. Everything's so dark, even the counselors must be asleep. By the time they wake up properly, we'll be gone." Even though no one could catch her, Patricia was glad she was with Gordon as their group crept through the trees to the nearest cabin. She felt excited as Ruth looked. Gordon halted the 3 girls, and instructed them in an authoritative voice. "He likes bossing people," thought Patricia, "but he's good at it. Rodney likes it too, but he's not." "After I hoot," whispered Gordon, "start making spooky noises and throw these through the window. Then follow me as fast as you can." He handed out knotted plastic bags filled with water. Then 4 figures sneaked up to the glassless window. Patricia peered in and saw a dozen sleeping bodies rolled in blankets. She waited tensely for Gordon's signal. "Hoo, hoo, hoo," and then the same call again. The girls began to moan. "Woo!" 4 assorted ghostly voices floated on the night air, and 4 arms flung water bombs into the cabin. A 5th voice made the spookiest noise, but no one heard. Patricia was enjoying herself. After all, she was more like a ghost than any of them. Shrieks and thumps came from inside. An older male voice shouted, "Who's there? Stop!" But now Patricia was flying down the road with the others. Her hair whipped backwards, and she laughed with exhilaration. Never before had she done something mischievous on purpose. It felt deliciously wicked. The shouting voice followed them, but it faded as they cut through the bushes and stumbled along the stony beach to the Owens cottage. It wasn't until they collapsed on the pier that Patricia noticed one person was missing. "Ruth's gone!" she cried, but of course they couldn't hear her. Rodney, Tom, Paul arrived seconds later. Everyone whispered at once. No one commented on Ruth's absence. "It's as if she doesn't exist," thought Patricia angrily, "as if she were invisible, like me." Finally Tom said, "Hey, Reed, where's your sister?" They all looked around. "Oh, no," groaned Rodney. "I knew we shouldn't have let her come." "She's a pest," said Gordon. "I guess we'll have to go back and look for her." His voice was exasperated. "They don't even care," thought Patricia. She wished she could tell Gordon and Rodney exactly what she thought of them. "We have to get home," Paul apologized. "My mother's a light sleeper, and she might get up and find out we're gone. There's no point in all of us staying anyhow." He and his sister slipped away into the darkness. "Let us know what happens," whispered Barbara as they left. At least she sounded concerned. Gordon, Rodney, Tom, and Patricia trudged back towards the camp. Rodney looked apprehensive. "It's dangerous to get too close to it. Maybe she's hiding in the bushes and she'll come out when she sees us. Or maybe she got caught," said Tom, voicing Patricia's thoughts. Gordon stopped. "Someone's coming." They jumped into the bushes just in time. A grim-faced man, a raincoat flung over his pajamas, was marching toward the road. He clutched a flashlight in one hand and Ruth's arm in the other hand. "You don't have to hold on to me," she told him coldly. "I'm not going to run away." You might. I won't risk letting you go until we get to your parents' place. I don't imagine they'll be too pleased seeing what their daughter's been up to in the middle of the night." After they passed, the boys were silent for a few minutes. "Well, Turner, you're the lucky one," sighed Gordon finally. "You can still sneak in and no one will be any wiser." He stood up and brushed leaves off his pants. "Come on, Rodney, let's go home and face the fireworks." Ruth's mother was always scolding her for one thing or another, but now her habitual irritation with her daughter boiled over. Patricia remembered Aunt Ginny's brief outburst after the horse incident. That had been directed clean anger. This was different, as if Ruth's misbehavior had sparked a flame that fed on itself until it raged out of control. She began berating her daughter at breakfast. Gordon looked around. "Calm down, Ma," he entreated. "You're working yourself up into one of your states." But she angrily banished him and Rodney and Ginny to the beach. Then she continued to rage. "That a daughter of mine would do such a thing," was her constant refrain. Nan's brittle voice drilled away at Ruth until Patricia wanted to scream. "I can't believe a daughter of mine would be so unladylike," she repeated. "I don't know what to do with you, Ruth. You're 12 years old and you are gallivanting off at night and behaving like a hoodlum." "The others did it too," muttered Ruth. Her mother had quickly found out who the others were. "It's a disgrace that the Thorpe girls were there. They're exactly the kind of wild teenager you're turning into. As for Gordon and Rodney, it's natural for boys to get up in mischief, but you had no business tagging along. I was mortified when the man appeared last night. The next thing we know, you'll be showing up with a policeman in town, in tow. I won't have it. Do you understand? I won't have my daughter behaving like this." Then she moved from last night to Ruth's whole character, bringing up incidents in her life from age 2 to the present. Nothing she described was really bad. "Just because you're attractive, you've always thought you'd get away with everything. Looks won't get you everything. You'll see. Sometimes I'd like to slap that pretty face of yours." Ruth looked as frightened as Patricia felt. Nan in the past was much, much worse than in the present. The furious woman paced wildly up and down the living room. It was as if she had come apart and didn't even know herself what she would say next. At last, however, she took a deep breath, as if trying to control herself. She stopped yelling and sent her daughter to her room. Ruth was to be confined to the cottage for the rest of the week. That night Ruth cried for hours, dry, choked sobs that shook the bed. Patricia lay beside her helplessly, tears streaming down her own face. When Andrew Reed arrived, his wife asked him to speak to his sons. He was mild with them. "Up to high jinks, eh? Just like your Uncle Wilfred. But you shouldn't have been there. You'd better write the camp a letter of apology." Then he took his daughters aside. "I'm very disappointed you were involved, Ruth. You've got to start mending your ways. You're making your mother very unhappy, and you know how agitated she can get. No one else in the family upsets her as much as you do. It's got to stop. Do you hear?" "But, Father, I don't do anything," cried Ruth. "Not any more than the boys." "But they're boys. You're not. You should know better. Now, I won't put you up with it any more. I won't put up with any more of it. The matter's closed." He lit his pipe and dismissed her.